Okay, so step number one when drawing any portrait, regardless of perspective, is that we need to establish our circle. If you want, you can use a compass tool to give yourself a more or less perfect circle. Once that's drawn in, we then want to establish our ovals, which are the side planes of the head. So effectively what we do is we slice off each side of the head, which elongates the cranium for us. Then notice how the angle is slightly tilted. So we have our vertical axis, which is tilted back, then our horizontal axis, which is tilted forward. We then want to extend our hairline across the top. We want to extend and connect both of our horizontal axes for our brow line, and then we want to come up and then back down and then connect the bottom of each oval. We then want to place our anchor points, which is the top of the upper lip and then the bottom of the lower lip. We want to extend down our center line of the face, and then we want to extend our vertical axis down and then pull that over, and we want to do that on both sides so that we have our chin. Okay. Once that's done, you can then connect the bottom of the chin given the perspective that we're dealing with, and then we just want to draw our neck. And with the way that I like to draw my drawings is once I have that Loomis head drawn in, I then extend the neck down into the shoulders, and that makes it so that my portrait is not a floating head in space, right? Okay, I think for this one I'm not going to place the cheek planes because I'm going to be doing a lot of work with my Assaro planes in this one. I want you to be able to see them, so I'm going to leave those out. Take a kneaded eraser, go ahead and hit your Loomis head so that it's more or less transparent on your paper, right? We're using this as a basic framework. Then, just like any portrait, what we want to do is we want to draw our ears of the subject first, okay? Now, for this one, the perspective is a little extreme. Remember why foreshortening is difficult in drawings. And the reason why is because it involves representing objects or figures, you could think of it that way too, where you showcase their depth and distance, and often when you do that, it results in a distortion, at least from the viewer's perspective, right? That's why it's difficult. That's why lots of people don't like to draw extreme angles. But that's what we need to do given this angle. So once we have the ears placed, we can then use those as the basis for drawing in the rest of our hairline. Now, once we have the ears drawn in, I go up, and then I go up to the hairline of the Loomis head, and then I connect the top of the head. Now, with this one, the subject has short hair, so we don't have to worry too much about it. But now what we're going to do is we're going to switch from the Loomis method, okay, to the Assaro method. Now the Assaro method does what for us? That's right. It gives us the basic planes of the face. This is what we're going to use to break down the face into its individual parts. And especially if you're new to drawing, this will be a game changer for you, right? We're taking it off and we're stripping the portrait down into bite-sized pieces. If you try to chew too much at a time, what happens to you? That's right, you choke and it's not pleasant. We're not going to do that. We want this to be as pleasant as possible, given the complex nature of drawing portraits. But what we do here is we establish the nose bridge plane first, and then we draw in the basic two-dimensional shape of the eyebrows. Once the two-dimensional shape of the eyebrows is drawn in, we then want to place these right here, okay? And what these are is these are frame lines. Frame lines are pretty much what they sound like. We are framing the top of the eye, okay? So these frame lines extend down to the top of the upper eyelid, and then once we have them extended like this, we can then connect them, right? Something just like this. And then, like in this eye here on the left, I'm gonna pull this line over right here, and this gives me the bottom of the eye. We have a little bit of the bottom of the eye. So I just want to kind of sketch that real quick. So I have that, and then I have the upper eyelid, which kind of folds back into the eye socket. So I'm bringing that out here as well. And now we're going to do the exact same thing on the other side. We're going to connect these lines here, pull this one over. And then once we have these all connected, I can then bring it back on itself just like this. And it doesn't matter if you go from the outside in or the inside out. All roads lead to Rome, right? And then here, just going to establish that upper eyelid as well. Okay, and then while we're here, I'm just going to draw in the iris, why not? And then when it comes to the nose, notice how we built the eyes from the top down. Well, with the nose, we're building it from the bottom up. So right here, refer to the Assaro head here. I am establishing that bottom plane, okay? Now, once we have that bottom plane drawn in, I'm then going to extend this line up here on this side. Going to kind of solidify that. I'm going to thicken up that line's quality. And then I'm going to bring this line in and connect it. And this brings out the nose ridge plane. And then I have the slope planes, which extend down from the ridge on both sides. Once I have those, I can then draw in my nose tip plane. And then the nostrils, why not? And then we have these two philtrum lines, which give us the philtrum plane. And then that extends down to that top anchor point, right? And remember, the top anchor point gives you your rough guesstimate for where the top of the upper lip sits. Once we have our lines extended down for that, then we want to place where the corners of our mouth will reside. And then we simply connect the corners of the mouth to the philtrum lines, which effectively gives us our Cupid's bow, right? And the Cupid's bow is what? That's right, it's the top center of the upper lip. And then right here we have the center of the lip right here. This gentleman, he has a thinner lower lip. His upper lip is much bigger given the nature of the perspective that we're dealing with here. So I'm just going to kind of pull this line, and I'm not going to get too fancy with it. And then I'm going to pull this line back up over, because we have a very defined line on the top of the lower lip. Okay, we're going to extend that all the way over. Okay, so enough playing around. Now what would I want to do is this one's going to be a little different. I'm extending these Assaro lines off of each side of the mouth here, so we can pull them away and then up to the nostril. Now, notice how we have the left side of the Assaro head model, and then we have the right side. Adult males tend to have sharper features in the jaw and the cheekbones. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually draw in the Assaro planes that are on the right side of the Assaro face. Okay, as opposed to the left. And I'm going to apply this structure of the Assaro planes to both sides of the face. I've talked about this in other tutorials where the Assaro head model itself is applicable to multiple faces, and John Assaro did that on purpose so that if you had a subject who maybe say was younger or had facial features that were softer, then you would use the left side of the Assaro head model. But in this instance, we have a subject where they have a very solid bone structure. And so I want to use the other side of the Assaro head model, the one that has the most planes for the sharpest features. So this is how you can use the Assaro head model to your benefit. And this definitely showcases the adaptability of the Assaro method. But just like this, right? Go nice and light. What this does is this frames the underlying form of the cheekbones, okay? And this will do you wonders, especially when the time comes and you want to go in and you want to start hatching and then shading or blending. Or who knows, maybe you're not even sequestering yourself to charcoal or graphite or digital renders. Maybe you're a painter and you're laying down the foundation for, let's say, oil painting. Oil painting is much like any visual medium where you have these layers on top of layers on top of layers, and even more so than a monochromatic scale because you have color theory, especially if you're not keeping the artwork to black and white. Irregardless of what it is that you're drawing to end with, the beginning, whether this be on a canvas or on a piece of paper, the Assaro method will help you frame everything that you're going to need in order to be successful down the road. And then here I'm just going to place in the Assaro planes for the upper and the lower lip. Remember, the upper lip has 2 planes, so 1 line, split it in 2. The bottom lip has 3 planes, so 2 lines, split it into 3. And notice how you can align the philtrum lines directly with those Assaro lines on the bottom of the lip. Now, this one here, what I'm going to do is we're going to play with a couple more Assaro planes than what we normally play with in these tutorials. I'm going to draw in the Assaro plane here to signify the top of the chin, right, where that connects to the bottom of the lower lip, just like this. Just like this. And then, of course, the Assaro planes extend down to the edge of the jawbone here. So we have this one on this side. I'm going to kind of thicken that up a little bit. And then we have the exact same thing on the other side, right? We want to make this sketch as symmetrical as we possibly can. So just go over that line again and again, and each time you pass on that line's quality will thicken up, right? That saturation will come through, so its weight will get darker. Something just like that. It's looking good. Now, to extend these planes, now you don't want to get too crazy with these, but we do want to give ourselves a little bit more structure than this, especially given the perspective that we're dealing with here. But I'm going to extend these down, right? And notice how that framework, it just continues to elongate the face and gives us what we need to identify where is the edge of that jawbone. And then right here, we're just going to simply connect these lines. And this does a much better job of showcasing the edge of that jawbone. It does a lot better than the Loomis method did. I always say the Loomis method is great, but even on its best day, all the Loomis method will ever be is a mannequin. It is your basic mannequin. The Assaro method is the next gear in winning the race, right? It's the one you need. So, and then here I'm just going to kind of thicken up some of these lines here. Why not? And then the hair is very, very short, so I'm not going to spend too much time with it. I'm just going to more or less give it its basic segments that it has so that we can see some flow. And then I'm going to go into the eyebrows and I'm going to start bringing out the flow of the hair. And I know that you guys have been asking me to go in and, hatch more, show you more tricks in that regard. So that's what I'm going to do with this one. But notice the direction that I'm striking on all of this, okay? Just like this. Wonderful. Just going to pull this. And this is where the subtleness of your pencil strikes really comes into play, okay? At this stage in the drawing process, what I would like to see is focus heavily on the direction of your hatch marks, okay? That's what I'm doing here. This is called hatching. Now there's hatching, cross hatching, there's all sorts of other terminology that are used for different techniques when it comes to building value. Because when you introduce value from black to white and everything in between, what you get as a byproduct, when it comes to the visual arts at least, is you introduce volume to the drawing. And what volume is what gives a drawing body, right? It's what gives it dimension. It makes it seem like it's three-dimensional, even though it'll only ever exist in 2D space, right? So just like this here, notice how I'm just gonna hatch this, and I'm lowering the value of the bottom plane of the nose. Now, if hatching like this is fairly new to you, I will tell you the three main areas, or four in this case, given the nature of the perspective that we're dealing with, that will always be of a lower value. Not all the time, but most of the time. The eye sockets will be of a lower value. The bottom plane of the nose will be of a lower value. And then the upper lip will be of a lower value. Okay, and the reason for that is because the majority of the time, the light source when it comes to portraits, whether people be indoors or outdoors or somewhere in between, will come from above. And light casts across the human face in this way. It's the same way. And the only thing that's different is the specifics of each individual lighting situation that you'll find yourself in. But then here, I'm just going through and I'm just hatching, and I'm keeping in mind the underlying flow of the framework that I've given myself. Now, the underlying flow for most faces will 75% of the time be the same. Obviously, there's individuality that needs to be taken into account when we are talking about drawing anybody, but those are subtleties. Most of the time, the foundation or the principles of how you draw somebody will be very much the same. So just keep that in mind. But I will say that if you really want to give yourself as much structure as possible, because maybe you're just still learning, or maybe you want to know, is go in and hatch each individual plane and hatch them with different pressure controls, right? I always say, when it comes to drawing in this manner, to use a very, very light pressure control to begin with, because you can always go back in and push harder and harder and lower that value again and again. It's really up to you as far as how you would like to accomplish that. But then, like right here, see, for the chin, that flow has changed, because effectively what I did when I connected those bottom lines is I gave myself the top ridge of that jawbone. Now I'm just going to hatch this, kind of cross hatch it as well, and kind of lower that value. But when it comes to hatching, you can hatch over the same areas again and again, and that value will lower and lower. It just really depends on kind of the aesthetic that you're going for. Notice how here, I'm just going to go through and I'm going to continue to extend these hatch marks up. One of the things that a lot of artists will do is they'll go across their entire drawing and they'll give it one solid hatch layer. You could think of it like that. And that's kind of like almost like a base layer. And then what they'll do is they'll go back through in specific areas, like let's say the eye sockets, like we were talking about earlier, or the bottom of the nose, or the upper lip, and they'll go through and they'll cross hatch just those specific areas. And then what happens is their drawing then becomes much more dynamic, okay? Now, you don't have to do that if you don't want to, but it's just a good best practice depending on what it is that you're trying to accomplish. So now see here, see how I'm going back through the eye socket and I'm cross hatching. So I'm pulling a line across the lines that I just drew. And this is a couple things. It lowers the value for one, makes the drawing more dynamic for two, but it really is an aesthetic that is personal preference. And then while we're here, I think I'm just going to give him a pupil. Why not? That way he's looking somewhere. He's not soulless. But yeah. That's looking pretty good. Lots of artists will avoid drawing extreme angles such as this because they're like, oh, well, I would never get a client that would want that. And that's fine. That is a valid argument. But I would say that it's always good to push yourself, be ever slightly outside of your comfort zone. And then that way you allow yourself the opportunity to be wrong. You allow yourself to realize, hey, look, I don't know everything. There's lots to learn. And of course, once you learn it, you can begin to try to perfect it, if you will, but you expand your knowledge. Extreme angles are difficult for a reason. It's because we hardly ever do them. And just like anything in life, if you hardly ever do it, you're probably not going to be very good at it. So that's pretty much it for this one. Stay happy, stay healthy, and remember, never stop drawing.